The dust that afternoon lay thick as flour on a baker's table, stirred by every bootstep and breath, and the sun hovered low enough to bruise the horizon in amber and rust. Eliza Running Willow moved through it slowly, the wooden crutches pressed beneath her arms creaking like old doors with every careful step. Heads turned, some in pity, some in curiosity, some in the quiet cruelty that comes from believing another's life is smaller than your own. She had learned to keep her eyes lowered, not from shame alone, but from survival, because hope exposed too often becomes a wound. Still, something in her chest kept lifting her gaze forward, toward a future she could not yet name, and that stubborn flicker refused to go out, even now, even here, as if the road itself were waiting to answer her back. Not long ago she had worked on the Carver Ranch at the edge of town, waking before dawn, braiding her hair by lamplight, believing effort might one day outweigh her limp. She tried harder than anyone, pushed past pain until her hands shook, but when the calves scattered and she could not run fast enough, the owner's patience dried up like a creek in August. He told her gently, which somehow hurt more, that she was a good girl but a burden to his operation. She nodded, thanked him, and walked away before he could see the tears burn down her face. Since then, the town had become a maze of closed doors and apologetic smiles, and every rejection carved another quiet hollow inside her, leaving her wondering how much of herself could be lost before nothing remained. By the time she reached the small homestead beyond the last row of buildings, her arms ached and her breath came thin, but she did not stop. The place was modest. Weathered boards, a low fence, a single cottonwood offering shade like an old friend who asked no questions. A man stood by the porch, mending tack with hands that moved slowly, deliberately, as if he had learned long ago not to rush what mattered. Caleb Hartman was 30, though the lines at the corners of his eyes made him seem older, shaped by sun and silence and the weight of years spent listening more than speaking. When he noticed her, he did not stare. He simply looked, the way one looks at a changing sky, attentive but unafraid. Eliza felt her practiced words rise in her throat, heavy and rehearsed, and wondered if this door too would quietly close. "I know you don't want a disabled woman as a housemaid," she said at last, her voice steady only because it had learned to be, "but I can cook, and mend, and do what I'm able." The sentence tasted like iron, a confession she had spoken too many times, each repetition chiseling her smaller. Caleb did not answer right away. He set the leather aside, stood, and walked to the pump, drawing water with a patient rhythm before handing her the tin cup. "You look tired," he said simply. The kindness in that small act startled her more than rejection ever had, because it carried no calculation. As she drank, the sun slipped lower, and she felt the world pause, balanced on the edge of something unnamed. "You can stay," he said finally, not as an offer weighted with charity, but as a fact like the weather or the shape of the land. "We'll figure the rest as it comes." There was no inspection of her crutches, no question of her worth measured against labor, and the ease of it frightened her. Eliza nodded, afraid to trust the ground beneath her feet, and followed him inside, carrying with her the quiet suspicion that gentleness always asked for payment later. The days that followed settled into a rhythm as unassuming as Caleb himself. Eliza cooked when she could, rested when she needed, and learned the shape of the homestead the way one learns a new song, slowly, with missteps and grace notes alike. The town watched from a distance, whispers threading through the saloon and the general store, wondering what kind of man would take in a woman who could not fully earn her keep. Caleb heard the murmurs and did nothing to stop them, which puzzled Eliza at first, until she realized his silence was not avoidance but confidence, a refusal to dignify cruelty with response. Still, each time she passed through town beside him, she felt the weight of eyes, and a familiar voice inside urged her to leave before she became another disappointment. In the quiet moments, when the sun dipped and the world softened, small gestures began to speak where words did not. Caleb fixed the worn leather of her crutches one evening, his hands careful, his focus absolute, as if the task were sacred. Eliza braided the mane of his horse the next morning, fingers moving in patterns taught by her mother long ago, a sign of respect and blessing. They shared meals mostly in silence, but it was a silence that listened, that held space for unspoken truths. Sometimes their eyes met across the table, and something unsteady bloomed in her chest, a warmth she did not yet dare to name. At night, Eliza lay awake, staring at the ceiling, listening to the wind move through the cottonwood, and wondered when survival had begun to feel like belonging. She had lived so long braced against loss that the idea of staying felt reckless, almost dangerous. The town's judgment pressed in on her thoughts, reminding her of the rules she had learned early. Do not ask for more than you are allowed, do not imagine futures meant for others. When she overheard laughter in town one afternoon, bets placed on how long the crippled girl would last, something inside her broke cleanly. She decided then that she would leave before kindness turned to obligation, before hope became another thing she failed to keep. She rose before dawn, the world still wrapped in shadows, and set her trembling hands to paper, each stroke weighted with a heart that both ached and feared. She wrote to Caleb with quiet sorrow, thanking him for his patience, his kindness, the gentle way he had seen her when no one else did. Her words trembled as she apologized for taking up space in his life, though deep down she knew it was love, not burden, she had carried. Promising herself she would not look back, she rose from the table, chest tight, heart heavy with longing and regret. The sky was a pale whisper of light as she stepped onto the empty road, each step feeling like it pulled at the very marrow of her being. Behind her, the homestead stood in stillness, bathed in the soft glow of morning, unaware of the quiet, wrenching choice that would shape both their lives forever. Caleb found the note just after sunrise. He read it once, then again, his jaw tightening not in anger but in understanding. He saddled his horse without hurry, a steadiness born of knowing what he needed to do, and followed the road toward town. He found her near the outskirts, paused beneath the open sky as if waiting for permission to disappear. "You don't get to decide your worth alone," he said, his voice low, carrying the weight of things long held back. Eliza turned, tears streaking her face, and told him she was tired of being someone's burden. He shook his head. "You never were," he replied. "You taught me how to stay when leaving would have been easier." The words unraveled the careful walls she had built around her heart, and for the first time in years, Eliza let herself weep without shame, her tears tracing the curve of longing and hope she had buried deep inside. She leaned into the truth she had feared most yet secretly cherished, that she wanted this life, this man, this fragile, breathtaking happiness that seemed too delicate for the world outside. Caleb stepped closer, the warmth of his presence wrapping around her like the softest blanket, and in his eyes she saw every unspoken promise he had carried for her, every quiet moment of devotion, every glance that had lingered longer than it should. He asked her then, not with flourish, not with grandiose words, but with a steady, unwavering certainty born of choice, of seeing her fully and loving her still, would she marry him? The world around them seemed to pause, holding its breath. Even the dust in the air hung suspended, as if waiting for her to say the word that would make everything possible. Her heart raced, her crutches trembled beneath her, yet she felt a courage she had never known before, and in that suspended, golden silence she whispered yes, and it was a yes that carried all the weight of fear, hope, and a love that had quietly grown stronger than any obstacle. Their wedding took place beneath the cottonwood, the town gathered not out of spectacle but curiosity slowly turning to respect. Eliza walked with her crutches down the small aisle of earth and grass, her head high, her steps unhidden. She wore a simple dress, her hair adorned with beads from her mother's old necklace, and when she reached Caleb, his eyes shone with something like awe. They spoke their vows plainly, promises rooted in everyday devotion rather than grand destiny, and when they were pronounced husband and wife, a hush fell, heavy with witness. In that moment, Eliza felt the weight of judgment lift, replaced by a dignity no one could take from her. Marriage did not turn their days into something easy or smooth. Instead, it stripped life bare and made it tenderly, achingly honest. They learned each other in the small hours. Caleb waking before dawn to light the stove so the cold would not reach her bones, Eliza brushing the dust from his shoulders each evening as if she were blessing him back into himself. Laughter came softly at first, then more freely, echoing through the rooms like something long denied permission to live. In the quiet nights, when the lamps burned low and the world shrank to breath and heartbeat, love revealed itself not in grand gestures but in the way his hand always found hers, as if it belonged there. When her strength waned, Caleb lifted her with a reverence that felt like prayer, never assuming, always waiting for her nod, his arms steady and sure as he carried her across thresholds both seen and unseen. She would rest her head against his chest and listen to his heart, finding comfort in its rhythm, realizing that she was no longer alone inside her own body. Eliza, in turn, gave him something no one else ever had, a gentleness that softened the old grief he wore like a second skin, a presence that made even his silences feel understood. In her smile, he found home, in her resilience, he found faith. Together, they built a life woven from shared glances, unspoken promises, and evenings that lingered long after the sun had gone. It was not a life defined by her limitations or his past, but by the love they chose daily, deliberately, and without apology. And in that choosing, again and again, they became more than they had ever dared to imagine, as if the world itself had finally made room for them to exist fully, tenderly, and forever. When Eliza returned to town weeks later, she moved with a quiet grace that seemed to bend the sunlight around her, her crutches no longer a sign of limitation but of the strength she had claimed for herself. Her gaze met the eyes of those who had once whispered, and she held it without flinch or apology, carrying a radiance that made even the hardest hearts pause. Some offered smiles of wonder, others looked away, unsure how to measure the woman who had become more than their judgments could contain. She understood, with a clarity born of both struggle and love, that worth is never measured by what one can do, but by the courage to simply exist fully. And that love, when it arrives softly and patiently, is not something owed or earned, it is a gift that sets the soul alight. If you listened closely, you might hear her story carried in the soft rustle of the cottonwood leaves, in the gentle sigh of the prairie wind, as if the earth itself remembered. Her journey, of fear, longing, and quiet courage, lingers in every whisper, a testament to the love that blooms slowly, tenderly, against all odds. That dignity grows not in ease but in patience, in the quiet moments of choosing each other again and again. And the hearts brave enough to remain, gentle enough to hold, steadfast enough to stay, bear a love so rare, so deep, that it lingers long after words have faded, a love the world scarcely sees, yet can never forget, echoing like a soft, endless promise beneath the endless sky.